Hello, Dawn Moore, Allegiance Title Company. Today I want to address an issue that recently came to my attention about the sale of other property contingency and when to exercise the knockout provision. In a previous video, I suggested to you that the sale of other property condition is actually already built into the third-party financing addendum for credit approval. The third-party financing addendum says that the contract is contingent on lender's approval of buyer's assets, income, and credit history. If the buyer's assets are tied up in the proceeds of the sale of their current home, then the third-party financing addendum approval is subject to the sale of their home. The key then, when taking an offer from a buyer that is subject to third-party financing, is to ask the specific question: does the buyer need to sell his or her home in order to buy this home? If the answer to that is yes, and your seller does not want to take on that issue, then I suggest the seller not accept a contract from that buyer subject to third-party financing for credit approval. The recent issue that came to my attention was when a buyer had a contract subject to sale of other property, and the seller exercised the knockout provision. The buyer waived the contingency for sale of other property, but yet 5 days later gave notice to the seller to terminate under the third-party financing addendum. The question was, can a buyer waive the contingency for sale of other property, but then if there's still time left under the third-party financing addendum, use that contingency to get out of the contract? The answer to that question is yes and no. If the buyer is unable to get financing due to some other credit factor other than his assets are tied up in the sale of his home, then the buyer does have an out under the third-party financing addendum for credit approval. However, if the only reason the buyer is unable to obtain financing is due to the non-receipt of proceeds from the sale of his home, then the buyer is in default of that contract. The buyer waives that contingency under the sale of other property contingent knockout provision. That is under paragraph D of that addendum. It is important for the buyer to understand this, because if the buyer cannot afford to buy the new home without selling his existing home, and the buyer waives the condition under the knockout provision, the buyer subjects himself to possible default, which means not only a loss of earnest money, but a possible suit for damages from the seller. I hope this may have answered a question you have had. Allegiance is here as a resource for you. Let us be of assistance, and I will see you at the closing table. Thank you.